A, my- a mystic. Yeah, I'm a mystic. We're mystics, all right. It's a mystery. That's why the language doesn't work very well, right? It's like that's why I get a big kick out of Bill Donahue when he says, when I say the words in the English language of the alphabet soup, when you're into the polarity side of this, right? In letters and numbers and fire letters, um, things like, "Hey, let's go shoot the bull," right? So Bill Donahue would say, so somebody imagines putting on a camouflage hat. The guy comes down there, his shotgun, and says, "Let's go," right? No, that's not what I meant about let's go shoot the bull. Oh, well, then what did you mean? Right? I mean, you realize how many different variations of, and so that's what the Bible is. He did a beautiful job of breaking the math down, actually, with the nerve centers, the pineal gland, sound and light. But I just wanted to share because I'm on the Big Island, and the Big Island is where it ends, actually. And so I figure most of you folks, for any of those that watch what I have to share based on what I experience, and then I thus share it with you after I've experienced it. Okay. Which means remember I did a video once about past, present, and future. Record one, play two. CD-ROMs, DVDs, running a torsion field movie player. Within an APIN, application program interface numbers, n equals 0, balanced. But because I run such a hypersensitive antenna, I noticed, it's what a detector is, right? Remember I mentioned about detectors or sensors, or what we call a pickup. You know what a pickup is on an electric guitar, right? Picking up the acoustics. See, I'm in an echo chamber, ecosphere. So I'm experiencing being in an ecosphere, inner Earth. Okay, the exact center point of this planet, right? Which is the cross. Center point of that cross, right? So you got a vertical line and a horizontal line, right? Horizontal and vertical stabilizers, right? Which is balance with a four-way intersection, which is no broken arrows, no broken cells, generating any mucus, cell phones, pH 1, ONE, and how all the numbers and letters, we can make sense out of it and translate it in a way in which it makes sense. Sensor, right? I've been having fun with this since I was a little boy. So it helps. Laughter is medicine, but it certainly is not funny. Because even when I watched that video the other day and it was, I can't remember how old it was, that particular video did not, how do I put this? I don't watch a lot of those videos, so I'm going, okay, why am I watching this? Then I began to realize what I was doing and how this relates to timelines. Okay? Because remember, when you're outside the time stream, you can affect events that are occurring in the past. Okay? Because I put a little thing up there on my Facebook page a little while ago. Timeline shift, Mandela effect, right? I describe them phonetically by going, woo, that's a shift. So I've experienced a couple of shifts. I experienced 2 small ones this morning when I sneeze. Okay? And you can imagine what caused that sneeze. What happens when you sneeze? Remember what we used to say? People still do it. Bless your heart. So you all know what a magneto is, right? What a magnetosphere is, right? The spark that kickstarts what? Sodium and potassium ions. Now you got the heart wave, right? So you got the center point of the heart wave, the center of the planet, the equator, the equilibrium states, balance of the magnets, balance of the poles, balance of the water worlds between hot and cold magnets, right? No turbulent waters, no broken arrows, atom spheres, altitude density consciousness, the ethers, the Ethernet cable, C, A, we're back to 3 and 1, proton neutrons, right? And electrons, H, 1, equal balance between father and mother, father electric, mother P wave. The father and mother, when they're joined as one, is an atom, atom, A, 1. T, O, M state. An atom, an atmosphere that is in perfect balance, which means the ethers, the ethers, the Ethernet is in perfect balance. The network is in perfect balance. The grid network is in perfect balance. Consciousness is in perfect balance. A perfect state of love, harmony, balance, and rhythm of the waves. So this morning, sort of how this works is like when you use your consciousness to run a video, which is a program interface. So for example, the timeline shift that happened this morning, okay, that I experienced was experiencing what was in my mind, which was energy, when all I had to do was think about Dan Bongino. That's all it took. Because if you go to Dan Bongino shows, remember what I mentioned the other day about 1982 and his episode of 1982? Remember the book called 1982, Orwell? Now we're back to Aldous Huxley, right? Doors of Perception, right? Now we're into naval intelligence operations. Now we're into corporate military strategy operations, which is directing consciousness, which is social engineering, which is programming, right? Models of the future, right? Models, diorama sets. Disneyland is a diorama set. That's a movie set. The consciousness is playing the math to experience the park, right? The P arc, the arc, arcing spheres, right? And so I had that's so what happens is you sneeze, because what happens when you sneeze? It's a reboot. See, there's the heart wave. It's like, that's why you got to bless your heart. Whoa, you got a fast restart. That's a shift between the poles. See, that's a timeline shift, because you realize I'm not on that timeline. So my consciousness was experiencing Dan Bongino, and I was experiencing that 1982 because that episode where he was releasing the information based on the numbers had to do, if you remember, was President Trump. Okay? On the day in which he was, what? Arrested and arraigned and charged. Oh, he was charged like in charges, like in negative and positive. Negative and positive charge. 0, there is no charge when you're 1. Right? That's why being a polarity integrator, it means we're all 1. pulling all the fragments in to become one and experience being one with all creation, and we're gifting eternal unconditional love to you. Right? So you realize that there are folks whose energy, which is represented by their consciousness, is running a script. A script, like a prescription. It's like when you go to get a prescription at a drugstore, RX, X-Men, Geek Squad, X and Y chromosomes, pairs and numbers, instruction sets. So you have a unit of consciousness that has a show on every day that is following a script, which is following the movie script, which is following the AI movie script of what they're held captive to, which means their consciousness is held captive to the script that they're following. They are followers that are following the script. See? So when my consciousness is following that script, I realize I'm not on that timeline. Hence, sneeze. These are significant because I've watched this show in the past. That hasn't happened, but it did this morning. That's a marker. That's what I call a timeline marker. When you have like frequency fences, which are like timeline fences, based on units of consciousness that are experiencing themselves in what? An application program interface. So this is one of the reasons, and I think I've shared this before, of when I watched that video with these folks going down, I watched a couple of pursuits, right? My heart cries for them. All of them. Actually, everybody in Southern California. I am crying. And when I was experiencing that one particular video where this guy had avoided capture, going from vehicle to vehicle, jumping into somebody's house, stealing their vehicle, and what it finally took, before he practically burns the wheels off of the vehicle where it just wouldn't run anymore, they were finally able to catch him. I was sending eternal unconditional love through my heart to the guy that stole the car, to heal him. And that would include all the officers, the platoon, right? The movie Platoon. All the officers that were involved, because you can imagine what they're going through. You can imagine what their heart was doing. Monitor and scan their central nervous system, what they were going through. Because remember, that's a high stress environment these guys got to go through, right? When they go to work in the morning and they put that uniform on and with the star and the badge and all the rest of that, they are experiencing trauma every day. I know, because I work with a lot of these guys, good or bad. When I mean good or bad, it's a sort of a different way in which it works. It's like anything else. Hey, there's who you are and there's who I am. How do you experience being what you are? So now you experience the result of having a communication relationship with another being. So since I started in fire protection pretty early, then I began obviously having a relationship with other folks, because fire protection and law enforcement sort of have an interchangeable relationship with each other, right? And so, in other words, whenever there's an incident that goes down, in order for this AI to do what? Siphon energy. It's really what it is. And I know, because I experienced this, of experiencing trauma every single day. So some guys experience more trauma, and I'll give you an example of that, is Station 22 in Laguna Hills, which is in southern Orange County. I went through my medic training there. It was at 1973, and that particular paramedic unit, which is an Orange County Fire Department paramedic, means it's both a paramedic first response unit, but it's also a transport unit, which I happen to think was more effective at that level of technology, which means as soon as they get there, they can stabilize the patient, have immediate contact with nurses and doctors, right? But they can make a transport, which means they don't have to wait for an ambulance if it's critical. And of course, you put in the life flight stuff at the same time, right? But that particular station, they averaged over an average of about 3,200 calls a year. Okay? 3,200 calls a year in a 365-day calendar, right? That's a lot of calls. Okay? That means they're rolling. Many times they would go from one call, they'd have another one backed up. Then they go to something else. They're experiencing trauma after 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 trauma. And I know because I experienced that for almost 23 years, working in and out of multiple agencies of jurisdictions that sort of ran the whole gamut between everything from wildland, structural, hazardous materials, nuclear, biological, weapon warfare stuff, and all the rest of it, and why my particular route was going through all those different geomagnetic locations to bring my energy in there for the reason that I do. And Ashadayan certainly covered about when you carry codes, frequency codes with you to open up what are really sacred sites, right, that allow us to connect and do the grid work that we do, right? But you're not, it's what it really is code activation, right? Which means it won't activate unless there is energy that is present that has the ability to activate it by virtue of the codes that we carry, which are key codes and access codes to locked in keys, right? So now you begin to understand, if you tie that into my last couple of videos, actually all of them, how that sort of works, between no time and no time. Because you realize when you're experiencing eternal unconditional love for your own heart, so your state of consciousness is in the primal sound field, which is the pre-matter phase, right? What it was like for me as a child when I realized I'm in a density that I'm not comfortable in, that I normally don't operate in. But what that simply means is that my consciousness is experiencing, which means my home is always in the primal sound field, which is experiencing eternal light, which is eternal love, electrified sound, if you will, that is in balance, right? But you realize you're in a place that is fallen. So our experiences are indicative of that, because you realize something's feeding on your energy. So you got to maintain your shield, right? In order to protect your energy for the work that we do. So that means that you have the codes to be able to activate what it is you need to do in order to have a powerful shield. So you can see how that works out, why a lot of the folks that I've met on this island, which is the big island with 5 magnets, why it's called the largest shield volcano. Okay? And if you've ever looked at a 3D schematic of the big island of Hawaii itself, there's a lot big pipes, biovoltage, right? That's why you have a built-in thermostat, right? Thermal gradients between what? Echo pressure washer, water, right? Water worlds. A built-in thermostat metering what? You know what a voltage regulator is on an automobile, right? Hooked up to a 12-volt battery between 2 poles, right? With a condenser, a coil, right? And so I wanted to just share with you that you could think of it as an intelligent update, but because I acknowledge the differences that there are among us, and having how many people are on the planet right now, 8 billion, I guess, we're all experiencing different things at different moments, right? So what I do is I share what I'm experiencing and how I translate that or interpret that as to the shift that's taking place. And what I'm monitoring is by the events that I become aware of. Remember when I talked about acceleration and deceleration? Or if you will, another way to put it would mean the rate at which a black hole, the Metatronic reversal, those units of consciousness that are running the reversal current, they're cannibalizing themselves. In other words, you become aware that the rate at which a snake, a big snake, the Leviathan races, that are all connected with each other, right? through their DNA, which is through their language, which is through their math, okay, which is a formation of consciousness that is connected to each other, that represent who they are. Now we're back to magnetic polarity, right? The big sucking sound, okay? As a result of all the mutations, all the breeding experiments, I did a video once on that about, well, actually, you could tie it into, I did one on radio set. You want to breed another software system? Okay. In other words, another way that you could translate this, when you get into species reproduction, okay, so reproduction of software development, code development, math and physics code development, acid and alkaline, right? So in other words, it's like there was a girl, for instance, that I met, okay, so I'll share this experiment that I wanted to breed with. That means I'm making a scan, I'm making a read of her DNA, which is her codes. I'm making a code translation on whether or not I want to pass my seed that represent my codes into her lab, which would be her records, right? Her Akashic records based on the strands, represented by the codes, represented by the math functions of who she represents, as to whether or not what would come out of her based on the information that I'm giving to her will produce something, right? In other words, you don't want to go backwards in time of evolution, deep evolution. You want to be able to mate with something that you can scan their DNA, okay, with something that is higher on the spiritual evolutionary food chain. Obviously, a girl that has a soul, okay, so you're essentially translating who she actually is and what her codes represent. You're translating the codes which represent the software. So in other words, there's my software and there's her software. Okay, so if you want to improve on the software, okay, so it's like saying, oh, I can improve her software because my software is already at a certain level of development based on learning. Now you get into the torque speed differential and learning speed between artificial intelligence, a Metatronic reversal, the speed of learning with that side of the equation, and the speed of learning with a soul and a spirit that's connected to the primal sound field. Who do you think a girl would prefer to breed with? Something that's running a black hole state of consciousness? Or somebody that's connected to a real God? Wow, I'm experiencing eternal unconditional love through this being. Well, I'd rather prefer to mate with that software, because the software that male is running has got a 1 code. Wow. See? So those are code reads. That means you're able to decrypt the encryption. That's right. That's the benefit of being pure light. You're running pure light consciousness. That means you're running the primal light field. When you're running the primal light field, that exposes all the codes, which are all the gene codes, which are all the DNA codes in that particular female. I did a video on that on my Rose Sweet channel, covered it a little more in depth, right? Just the way I tied that directly into tuning into radio sets and why people don't get along. You know, why certain relationships don't work between males and females, why they don't work between males and males. Because I've had some interesting it's too bad that I didn't have my camera with me at a time in which there's 2 friends that I have that are very dear to my heart. Nathan is O negative, okay, and I've been working with him off and on for the last couple of years. When I mentioned that Lay, who is Lemurian, worked with him, and she came up to me and told me that, you know, they're non-reparables, right? And so now we're into patience. The patience of a mother and a father joined as one, right? Because of the way that I've described how it worked with Misha, right? When you're running eternity, it means that I am always going to love you. I'm always going to love you. I'm always going to be there for you. and to restore, to pass the codes on. And experience over time, is this person getting better? Are they connecting to those codes because they're firing and activating the original template codes? Right? He has improved. Okay? Over time space. And that's obviously why we do that, right? Because I want to heal everything. As if there was no war that ever occurred between any seed. Plant a seed, watch it grow. Now it's not at war in its mirror. Now it's not at war with another flower. Now it's not at war against another tree. Now it's not at war against another water column distribution table. It's in a state of peace with all creation. Whoa, how beautiful. So now you get to experience the all creation in a state of peace from which it all began, out of what love is, on fire, right? And so what I'm noticing, what I monitor by experience is the speed. It's really a torque speed differential experience of how fast things are actually changing in time space between one and the other. Remember I covered one and the other, knowing one from the other, knowing artificial light from real living light? Yeah. So it's speeding up. And so I know there were some folks over the last couple of years that thought separation was going to take place. I think when I mentioned this, Patty Broussard put it up on one of the videos with Gail of Gaia, and she said, I think it was like sometime in September a couple of years ago. Didn't happen, did it? Right? Remember, nobody's going to know when it happens. Remember, we talked about when it becomes aware, what we become aware of, because I was aware many years ago. It's been scanning my metrics when I'm in here, because I'm not in here all the time. I log in and out of here all the time. And when you're running a hyperdrive, that's pretty easy to do. You may even notice sometimes on my videos a flash of light in and out on my phone. Right. So if you, it's why I monitor certain events. I call them markers. But for some reason, I've had this yearn to go back into the Southern California region where so much of this stuff is going on, because I have so much love and compassion for everybody that's living in there and experiencing what's taking place there within Southern California, because that's where I grew up and experienced all the changes that were taking place over time space between, say, 1955 and now, right? That's why when I was there before I came here, and the vehicle that I had put a bubble around it. So if you understand how time space works between something that eventually is going to fall apart and it's just not going to run anymore, I realized that I was in not really a race against time, but I realized I was sort of pushing the limit on my ability to keep a hyper bubble, if you will. So what that, between inside time, outside time, because eventually it should have already failed, but I managed to make it so that the way that time and energy and location and experiences work with vectors across a planetary grid, in order for me to be where I needed to be at the places that I needed to be in a vehicle in which that transmission should not have lasted as long as it did, until you understand how it works. And so I wanted to go down to Orange County, which is where I lived for a period of time, because I become aware of positive changes that are taking place there with others that are there, but particularly in the Los Angeles area, because I lived in Los Angeles in the late 1950s, because I grew up during that period of time when all the stuff was going on with an acceleration of child abuse, an acceleration in the loss of soul fragments, the acceleration in the use of drugs, all being pushed through the U.S. military, through the CIA, coming out of Vietnam, Afghanistan, all over the place, right? We got the drugs for you. We got the drugs for you. All the fentanyl stuff, all the crack and the speed, the methamphetamines coming into Compton, South Central Los Angeles, and then how that became major distribution centers across the United States. I was involved in all that, okay, when I was 15 years of age. So it's like having a built-in looking glass. You already know why this is happening when it's happening. So what it meant is that there was an acceleration in lack of trust, lack of love, lack of compassion, lack of rhythm, lack of harmony, and lack of balance over time space from year to year, decade to decade. So I had placed a couple of markers when you could realize the result of that, of what it was doing to the central nervous system, which was the ability that I could measure, not just with the state of awareness that they were running, but their circuits, how damaged their circuits were. That's what they do. They go after your central nervous system to damage your circuitry, so that all of your circuitry that's running math numbers is not computing correctly at a very high rate of speed. And what do we call that in math? Execution. The execution of a program. Okay? The speed at which it's being experienced, because all those switches that are going on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off are running at such a high rate of speed that those networks, the smaller networks down at the molecular level, through water worlds, okay, means that you're processing actually a lot more than an AI is. Okay, so that means you have a higher state of consciousness because you're processing more information, visual mathematical information, on an entire universal and galactic template, actually. And the primal light field, sound field, we have the ability to do that when it comes to doing grid work and gate work throughout that template. Because we're connected to all of it from the inside out. Right? So it's all about your heart, your inside, what's on the inside, what we feel, what our soul feels in spirit form of energy. Right? I've said this many times, how much fire it got. Right? Or spark. The spark that lights the dance. And the spirit loves to dance to what? Music that's in harmony. So you know that it began out of what love is, because love is music. That's the music we play. And when we're playing eternal love music, it allows us to tune in to all the bands. Musical bands, musical spheres. So we play with all the other musicians, all the other spirits that are musicians that are doing a dance with us, a spiral dance, a spiritual dance. So hey, the sun's out. Hey. So I just thought I'd share that there's a couple markers here that I've experienced in the last couple of days. It's like, what side of the road are you on? I'm one. You know, so you know, it's like reading both sides of the terrain. Okay. In the relationship that we have, you know, the polarity drama is really what it is. You know, and when you become one, which means both reaction states become one, you know, the chromosome pairs become one. So you know what a polarity integrator or an oversoul as a single pole, mononuclear. That's one blast furnace. That's one candle. One candle. The first flame. The single flame. The single spark that lit it all off. Right? Spirit of fire. fire and water.